Hello and happy Halloween, Bond fans. I'm Jim Crowley and this is Bond-tober. We're closing out this season by looking at one of the quintessential elements of the James Bond series. The people you really can't replace unless the boss decides you've failed him. These are the best Bond henchmen. Clocking in at number 10 is Dario from License to Kill. Now, at first glance, Dario doesn't seem like much. He seems like one of those generic henchmen who's just very handy-dandy with the switchblade. However, I think it's elevated by the sheer presence and magnitude of actor Benicio del Toro in one of his very earliest roles in a motion picture. And Benicio del Toro is a marvelous actor. Not only does he have such great presence, but he also has the dramatic chops to carry it off, as we've seen in other films such as Traffic, and probably my favorite film of his, the first Sicario. That was just an amazing performance. Kind of made me think that Sicario was Dario if he survived the situation he was put in, and he became what he was. So that's a little fun headcanon for you. But I like Dario in the fact that he is a cold, cunning sidekick, and even is smart enough to realize, like, unlike a lot of other henchmen, it's just like, oh, I know this guy, and I'm going to let him know that I know him. And it leads to some complications, which leads into the final action sequence of the film. But I like, too, that he seems the most loyal out of Sanchez's crew, and obviously he's the one who would never even dare to cross him, nor would Sanchez even think that Dario would ever cross him in his lifetime. So I like that little dynamic between the two of them. It plays on Sanchez's true desire for loyalty amongst his lecherous bunch. And Dario is lecherous indeed, but he is very loyal to Sanchez, which I think gives him a little extra layer of depth. And so with that, we're going to close out Dario with...
Where's my wife?
Don't worry. We gave her a nice honeymoon.
Mr. Stamper from Tomorrow Never Dies. Sorry, just had to take the opportunity to imitate Jonathan Pryce because I freaking love Elliot Carver. It's interesting because Mr. Stamper is kind of what people think of as just kind of the generic strong man, the blonde kind of German-esque kind of henchman that Bond films usually have. And there aren't too many of those, actually. I think Stamper's really the only one who's there, and plus he's the main henchman status. There's one thing about Stamper that does slightly disappoint me, is that in the first couple minutes of the film, we see that not only is he intimidating, but he does kind of have a little dry sense of humor, especially when checking in with Elliot Carver about the recent massacre he's just enabled for him.
Phase 2 is underway. I have the videotape. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm told the footage is excellent.
I wish there was just a little touch more of that. I feel like a lot of possible stuff with him was left on the cutting room floor. So, towards the end, he does kind of devolve into a generic strongman. But I think Gottsauto just has that kind of... he does have that presence that you never forget him. Plus, I do love his name, Mr. Stamper. It sounds so much like a sidekick's name or a henchman's name. So I just couldn't see leaving him off the list.
I owe you an unpleasant death, Mr. Bond.
Hinx from Spectre. Now, you guys have seen this season and in previous seasons that I'm not the biggest fan of Spectre. I think it's a very bad movie, especially in terms of its relationship to the James Bond canon. It's not very well executed. But one of the things they did get right, one of the very, very few things they got, was getting Dave Bautista to play Hinx, the henchman. I think Dave Bautista was still on the cusp of being in Guardian. He was in Guardians of the Galaxy as Drax. But this was right on the cusp of him starting to be taken a little more seriously in Hollywood. That not only was he jumping from franchise to franchise, his skills were improving. And I like that he did put a lot of thought into Hinx's character. You know, he never speaks except for the final phrase and during the fight on the train. He is kind of just a brute force, but you can see there's wheels turning in there, and I really do think that that's starting to translate very well for Dave Bautista. He's working a lot with Denis Villeneuve. He's working in a lot of films. He is becoming a very good actor, I think. And he's choosing projects to challenge himself. I think this one might have been the challenge of his physicality, because he certainly pulls that off, and his fight with Craig is pretty good. You know, I was kind of let down by most of the action in Spectre, but I think in this case you could see he was clearly trying, and he was clearly very excited to be there. And so, you know, this is mostly because I love Dave and I wish nothing but the best for him, but Hinx was one of the very few silver linings of Spectre, and I got to give him a lot of credit. Zhao from Die Another Day. You know, it takes really good skill from a good actor to pull off the fact that you're in this really crazy makeup where you're supposed to be stripped of most of your genetic features, so you have kind of a generic face makeup with this kind of eerie white skin tone. You also have diamonds blasted into one side of your face, and to still come off as a credible henchman. And that's what Rick Yoon really achieved with Zhao in Die Another Day. You know, everybody likes to point out that if he goes to this clinic where the doctor is supposed to be frightfully greedy for money, that he hasn't even tried to take out the diamonds at least once. They're still there. Otherwise, you really wouldn't have a henchman, would you? You would just have Rick Yoon trying his best with weak material. But I think it gave him a little bit of a visual iconic look, like several of the henchmen we're going to be talking about coming up. And, you know, he doesn't do all that much in Die Another Day, but when he's there, he's a good presence, and his skills driving the Jaguar against the Aston Martin are fantastic. I really do love he has this kind of confident swagger about him that he likes to embrace. I think it makes up for this kind of appearance and maybe a little bit of his lack of full physicality, possibly because of the treatment. You know, it's just one of those things where I like Die Another Day, and I always liked Zhao. I liked Rick Yoon. I think he was really good. So, and plus he gets a pretty awesome death. So, to close him off, I'll say, you know, steady henchman, awesome death. Mayday from A View to a Kill. A View to a Kill is interesting. Not because the movie itself is frightfully interesting. I don't think the writing was very good, but just some of the ideas thrown into the mix are so interesting. And one of the most important aspects of the film, and part of its legacy as well, is Christopher Walken is the main villain, and they decided that Grace Jones was the woman to play his henchwoman, Mayday. I got to agree with them. Grace Jones is very iconic for a reason. She was a very striking woman. She had such a fierce, commanding personality that I think really befitted this kind of different twist on henchman, that the henchman was kind of an equal to the main villain. And Mayday is definitely one of those henchmen that is very willing to get her hands dirty. She's willing to go and kill people for Max Zorin, partly because they're having a little bit of a romance, which Christopher Walken and Grace Jones having a romance is a very unique occurrence to cinema. You'll probably never see something like that again. But there is something that you do pick up after a couple of viewings, is her own sense of loyalty to Max. She really genuinely loves Max, and she also loves Jenny Flex and her other cohort. And when things go south for her towards the end of the third act, Max Zorin betrays her, and she decides to help James get rid of the bomb that would set off a flood of the San Andreas Fault. you really do buy her change of heart, and it leads to a strangely emotional moment when she's carting the train with the bomb out of the tunnel, and James is trying to stop her, and you see Max and her absolute pure defiance before being blown to smithereens is actually some good acting by Grace Jones. I don't think she was really much known for being a great actress necessarily, but she could pull it off. She could hold her own. And so Mayday is a very memorable part of a very average movie. You know, good on you, Grace. Boris from GoldenEye. I wanted to include him on the list because he's a very unusual henchman. One, he's played for laughs, which we haven't really seen outside of Jaws, perhaps. But we also see he is not a physical threat at all. He's a computer nerd. He's a expert hacker, and he's all about himself. He's, totally self-centered. And I love his little repartee with Natalia at the installation at Cervinaia. He's also a little bit of a dirt randy little sod, as they like to say in the UK. He likes to play word games with some rather naughty passwords, except for the one case where James needs it. I think it would have been a lot funnier if he was allowed to use kind of a dirtier phrase for the escape sequence. But at the same time, Alan Cumming is one of those genuinely great character actors. He can come in and he can do practically anything and do it very well. I love the attention that he likes to wear, kind of like Hawaiian shirts, or sometimes with a leather jacket, because he's kind of a surfer bum, but also kind of a, an edgy kind of hacker. He does a fun little spin with his pen, which leads to a great action sequence. But I also love how freaked out he gets when Natalia, who he sees as kind of an idiot, outsmarts him in front of Alec. It's a funny moment, and during the whole action sequences, things are blowing up. He's just trying to figure out how to get back into GoldenEye's server, and he can't, so he does this.
Speak to me!
He's just a barrel of laughs. I love watching him every time, and he gets the absolute funniest death in James Bond as well.
Yes! I am invincible!
So Boris rightly deserves his place in the middle of the list for the novelty of it, the fun writing, the fun acting, just a fun twist on the henchman personality for James Bond. It's just aces. Irma Bunt from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Okay, so we go from a funny henchman to a dead serious one. And one that has a kind of a fascinating dour personality. We have Irma Bunt, who is the henchwoman to Blofeld at the Piz Gloria complex. She kind of wrangles the girls at, the Angels of Death. She's kind of their minder. She doesn't appear too many times in the movie, but when she does, she has this fierce look on her face, and that comes a lot from the great talent of Ilse Steppet, who played her. Sadly, Ilse Steppet passed away not long after filming, I think shortly after the film came out, too, rather. She just really brought this menacing little woman to screen, and it's a little different from Rosa Klebb, where it was this little feisty woman. This is a very no-nonsense woman. And you can see in the final scene that she's ultimately the one who destroys the love of James's life. She's the one to pull the trigger. I was not as shocked that she would do it. I know she would do it. Because she's so fiercely devoted to Blofeld. And in the book, they're actually a married couple, which I kind of wish the film would play on, or at least hint that they were romantic and like they were in the book or married. I think that would have made it much more interesting. I think it would have showed that James can't sway this particular woman, or he can't really outmaneuver them. It would have added just a little bit more of an interesting dynamic to the mix. But for the fact that she does what she does at the end, Irma is very high up because she's one of the few truly effective henchmen to get that close to James and take something precious away from him, and just gets to drive off unscathed. She never even gets to come back in Diamonds Are Forever, possibly due to the death of Ilsa Steppet. But they, the series has such a habit of recasting characters. Surely they could have recast her. Surely she could have gotten her just desserts for what she did. But no, Diamonds Are Forever did what it did, and forget it. But she's definitely high up on the list for that very reason. Red Grant from Russia with Love. Looking at From Russia with Love, it's very interesting to try to pick who the actual henchman is, because clearly Blofeld is in the movie, called Number One, and you also have Kronstein, you also have Rosa Klebb, and you have Red Grant. I went with Red Grant simply because, based on his criminal record, and he's put under the employ of Rosa Klebb and Kronstein, so that kind of makes him the de facto henchman, and they did a really great job building this guy up as a credible threat, and largely that's due to the outstanding performance of Robert Shaw as Grant. He, at this point in his career, was very physically commanding on stage. They used to say that his Shakespeare was ranked with some of the greatest, so his imposing presence really gives Grant a lot of credibility, especially up against Sean Connery, who himself was very physically imposing. Another thing, too, was his ability to act as a everyman, like when he impersonates Nash. He puts on that rather posh voice and acts a little befuddled, like he's been in the office all day, and it just shows how good of a great actor Robert Shaw really was. But it also fools James Bond. He's a little suspicious until Grant tips his hand in the restaurant car. But then you also get this wonderful monologue from Grant where he basically spells out the plot to James and some confused audience members as well. That's probably why it's there. But he really sells it, and he really does look like he's about to kill James, and he's only done in by his greed, which it was well established when they were reading off his criminal record. And he's also done in by his own weapon, which became a very common thing for James Bond moving forward. So Grant was really a top henchman, and like I said in last week's episode, he and Bond have one of the best action sequences in the whole canon. Just that fist fight in the Orient Express in this very small cabin. He's just a great, imposing presence, and he set the bar very high. And the only actors who could really top that just a little are coming up. Jaws, from The Spy Who Loved Me. Now, I'm only keeping this choice as it pertains to The Spy Who Loved Me. As we know in Moonraker, he starts off as an evil henchman, but then turns good when he gets a girlfriend in a pretty goofy, yet kind of funny moment. So I'm not going to talk too much about Moonraker. I'm going to stick to Spy Who Loved Me. He is literally the person people think of most next to our number one choice as what a Bond henchman really is. That is this extremely tall, muscular, mute kind of assassin. And in his case, he has these very special teeth that he has in his mouth, these sharp metal teeth, giving him his nickname, that also kind of gives him this almost vampiric edge to him, almost like something out of a Hammer horror film, because Richard Kiel has such a imposing presence. Like, even just if you put somebody next to him, he looks so damn intimidating because he's so tall. but he also kind of has this... Keel also had this innate sense of humor with the character, like in terms of how big he is and how he reacts to things, and his use of doing that slow kind of smile whenever he approaches his victims when he knows that their time is up at his hands. It kind of gives him a little bit of a naughty little sense of humor that I think kind of gave the character dimension. And there are some times in the movie where things are played up for laughs, like when he drops the brick on his foot. It is a funny moment, but you never lose sight of the menace. And one thing that I thought was very interesting was that Jaws was meant to die at the end of the film, but test audiences and the crew fell in love with Keel so much that they decided to insert a shot of him surfacing in the clear waters and just kind of swimming off to the end of the movie, which kind of was, this predated Michael Myers, the idea of the unstoppable killer, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. But in this movie, he really cemented himself in an iconic way. Jaws is just a fantastic henchman. And the number one is Oddjob from Goldfinger. Well, we have the gold standard here, folks. Oddjob really is the first thing people think of when they think henchman. They think of Oddjob, they think of the hat with the razor brim that when he throws it, he could take somebody out. And Harold Sakata himself was an Olympic wrestler, so he already had the physical stature of what they required for the part. And again, much like Richard Keel, he kind of played into his ego, I think, because when Bond is trying to fight him at the end at Fort Knox, he throws a gold bar at him and he tries to punch him. He just smiles. That, to me, is classic, that this guy is so strong and so confident in his abilities that all he can do is just smile in the face of danger. That just shows that Oddjob really has nothing left to lose, and he will fight to the very end. Plus, I think the role of the chauffeur actually kind of gives him a little bit of a dignity that a lot of the henchmen kind of lack, in that Goldfinger does treat him as a subordinate, but he also treats him with just a little bit of respect, having him be his caddy, having him be his driver. He always seems to treat Oddjob with a modicum of respect. Now, I do love the scene where he drives out with Mr. Solo and executes him. A lot of people think that's too lengthy, but it really does show that he can be a cold assassin when they really need him to be. Like, he doesn't have to use the hat all the time, that he could just take somebody out and just whack them, which I really do think was a great choice on the filmmaker's part. And, of course, much like Red Grant, he's done in by his own killing device, in this case, his hat. And poor Harold Sakata got burned during that sequence because the flames and the sparks were a little too strong, and so he burned his hands, unfortunately. But he stuck it through and resulted in a lot of good shots of him. And it gave James Bond one of his finer quips in the movie.
You okay, James? Where's your butler friend?
Oh, he blew a fuse.
And so I have to... so I will throw my proverbial hat to Oddjob. Oh, bugger. There you have it, folks. That's the best James Bond henchman. It's been a really fun season, guys, and I want to thank you guys again for coming back and watching all the previous seasons. I really do appreciate it. I really have a great time with this. It is challenging trying to make the lists exactly right and trying to explain myself. I just thank you guys again so much. I just love doing this, and hopefully things get moving again with the Bond universe, that there'll be some new things I can talk about. But until then, and until next season, I'm Jim Crowley of Jim and Parker's Excellent Podcast. This has been Bond-tober.